Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or good whatever time it is, and welcome to our first online pre-recorded lesson. I know this is a bit weird. Trust me, it's really weird for me too. I'm literally speaking to a screen, and that's weird. But I hope that you got the 5 of you that are probably actually watching this video are going to enjoy this. As a reminder, this video is not mandatory. It is only here for you so that you may have a little bit of extra background information. Also, if you just are really bored and want to listen to my voice to help you fall asleep, because I know I'm very boring. Now, a couple things before we get started. You may notice that there is some slight quiet music in the background. Just trying something out here to, fill in the empty space. If you guys like it or you don't like it, leave a comment below. That's really weird for me to say, but whatever. Leave a comment below if you like it or if you don't like it, and just keep, let me know what you guys, if you enjoy it or not. Okay. One other thing that you're going to notice is different is that this week we have a lesson goal instead of an essential question. It's kind of similar, but we're just doing this because today we're actually combining 3 different lessons into one for this week, rather than just because we don't have enough time to go through all of them individually as much as I want to. Alright, so with that being said, our lesson goal today is to identify the similarities and differences between the 3 Mesoamerican civilizations. What are those 3 Mesoamerican civilizations? Well, they are the Maya, the Aztec, and the Inca. And so we're going to get started in just a second. But before I do, real quick, last thing. At the end of each slide, I will say pause. When I say that, go ahead and pause your video, because that means that I'm about to move on. And if you're still taking your notes, just pause the video, finish taking your notes, resume the video, and then it will jump to the next slide and you'll continue to hear me speaking. I come now with a built-in pause button. I'm sure many of you guys have always dreamed of having that so that you could get me to stop talking every once in a while. Now you have that power. Alright, without any further ado, we're going to get started. So if you still need the slide, pause. Alright, so starting with the geography of Mesoamerica. So Mesoamerica starts in around Mexico, and it extends south through Central America, which is that little thin strip of land that connects North America to South America. So as you're traveling through Central America, you would see mostly rugged mountain ranges, volcanoes, and vast amounts of farmland, especially as you get further south. Now, once you've crossed through Central America, you're going to end up in South America. And so starting at the top of South America, you would see the Andes mountain range. This is a mountain range that stretches from the tip of South America at the very top all the way down to the very bottom. You could literally walk the whole Andes mountain range and you'd walk straight down the continent of South America. So as you travel a little bit south past the Andes mountain range, you would end up finding the great rainforests of South America once you hit about the middle of South America. The most famous of these being the Amazon. Now, that's not the only rainforest in South America, but it is the most famous because it is one of the largest, and truly when we think of South America, we probably think of the rainforest. Kind of like how when you might think of Africa, you probably think of like lions and the savannah and everything. That's not the entirety of what the continent looks like, but that's what its most noticeable features are. Now, as you approach the southern tip of South America, you would see that the land would flatten until it reached the Atlantic Ocean. Pause. So this is a map of Mesoamerica. You can see that we, hopefully you can all see my mouse up here. We would start up here in Mexico. You can see Mexico is rather mountainous. Or high elevations. Then we progress further down until we reach the Central America, the Yucatan Peninsula. In fact, fun little fact, we believe that the asteroid or the meteorite that killed the dinosaurs actually impacted in this area because of, we basically can see underwater there's a giant blast crater, and we think that that's what formed the Yucatan Peninsula. Fun little fact. So as we go further south, we would reach the Isthmus of Panama, which is only about 30 miles wide. So the the land that connects North America to South America, what we call a land bridge, gets very, very narrow. In fact, it was so narrow that about 100, 200 years ago, we built the Panama Canal. Now, you guys remember when we were talking about China, we talked a little bit about canals. This basically linked the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. So now boats, rather than having to sail, let's say, from New York all the way down South America's coastline, past Cape Horn, and all the way back up just to get to Los Angeles, now they could just sail straight through this little piece of land. Now you might ask, why didn't they just sail up north and over North America? Well, that's because there was always too much ice, and it was impossible to sail up north past North America. So we always had to sail down south. So by building this canal, made things a lot easier. And then we have the Andes Mountain Range in South America. We have the Amazon Basin, which is where the Amazon rainforest is, and the Amazon River. We have the Brazilian highlands, etc. All right, we're going to start our lesson today then with the first of the civilizations, with the Maya. So the Maya Empire, or Maya civilization, sorry, they were not an empire, they were a civilization. The Maya reached kind of the height of their culture and the height of their power around the same time that in Europe, the Roman Empire is declining. Now remember, just because they reached the height of their power in the year 200 CE, it does not mean that that's when they first kind of came into existence. Rather, it's more of just when they, were at their most powerful. But from the year 200 CE to 900 CE, the Maya spread their culture across Mesoamerica, including parts of Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. Now, the Mayan landscape was rather varied because they controlled quite a large amount of land. In the south, you would find pine forests that would cover the mountain highlands. Meanwhile, in the north of their territory, the land was covered in rainforests, swamps, and grasslands. Pause. Now, in order to talk about the Maya, we first have to talk about what culture really influenced them, and that is the Olmec. This is an ancient Mesoamerican people. Now, why aren't we talking about the Olmec in this lesson? Well, the reason why is because we know very little about them. I'm going to cover what we do know, and then I'll cover why we don't know any more than that in just a second. So what do we know? Well, the Olmec developed farming techniques that allowed them to create large city centers similar to China and Rome, though they discovered these farming techniques long before either civilization really reached the height of their power. In fact, by the year 1400 BCE, the Olmec had already built their capital city that had these huge palaces and religious temples, these super impressive buildings. But by the year 500 BCE, so around the same time that the Roman Empire is turning into a republic and first starting to gain some of its fame. So around 500 BCE, the Olmec had vanished. And what little we know about them is what we can discover from observing their statues. The Olmec did not have a written language that we can translate. They wrote in glyphs. And the problem with glyphs is that they are pictures that stand for words, sounds, phrases, perhaps even entire sentences. And without a key or a legend to help us translate, this symbol equals this, and this symbol plus this symbol equals this. Let's say a bird equals king, the sun equals God, but when you put bird and sun together, you get something like, fast food. They didn't have fast food, but you can just see by how combining two different symbols can completely change the meaning of the word, and suddenly now, while these two symbols on their own may have meant something, combined, they have nothing in common with their original word. That makes translating these so difficult. It's just like the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. And the only reason we were able to translate the hieroglyphs of the Egyptians is because we discovered something called the Rosetta Stone. The Rosetta Stone was this large stone that had 4 languages carved into it, a different language on each side of the stone. Now, 3 of those languages we already had been able to translate. I believe one was ancient Greek, another was ancient Mesopotamian, and I think the last one was ancient Hebrew. Not entirely sure off the top of my head. But we have those three languages, and what we noticed is that each side said the same exact thing. And so while we couldn't read the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, because we knew that each side said the same thing, we were able to use that to unlock the Egyptian language. Sadly, we don't have an Olmec version of the Rosetta Stone. And so we really don't know if what any of the symbols stood for. We can take guesses, but the problem is with the way that glyphs work, it's virtually impossible for us to translate their language. And so little of their language even still exists to this day that what little we have is not enough to even start to truly guess. The only thing that really has survived from the Olmec are these large statues, which could represent specific people, could represent gods, it could also just represent their ideas of beauty. We really don't know. Pause. So, okay, we've discussed the Olmec, and now we're going to kind of fast forward a little bit to the Maya and their classic period. So remember, the Maya first formed their civilization, actually around the same time that the Olmec are around. But they don't reach the height of their power until long after the Olmec are gone. And the reason why is that the Maya actually kind of build their civilization on the ruins of the Olmec. So from 200 CE to 900 CE, the Maya adapt and improve upon the ideas that they had learned from the Olmec. Now, what's really fascinating about the Maya is that although they never discovered metal tools, they were still able to create these incredible stone cities, some of which have still survived to this day. And, I've talked about before about how, the discovery of metal smithing, specifically iron smelting, the ability to make iron tools is what allows a civilization to advance. The Maya, and to a further extension, the Aztec and the Inca, kind of are the exception to that rule. They are one of the only civilizations that don't discover metal tools that are able to build these massive, impressive cities that we see in China, Europe, and Africa. So it's really kind of impressive that they were able to build these cities to create these farming techniques that didn't require the use of metal tools. Now, perhaps what the Maya are most famous for are their study of astronomy, which led them to create incredibly accurate calendars using a lot of math. And in fact, it's sadly what most people remember them for was the Mayan calendar that predicted supposedly predicted the end of the world in 2012. Didn't actually predict the end of the world, as partly evidenced by the fact that we are still around to this day, but also by the fact that if you asked any Mayan person, hey, does this calendar mean the world's going to end? They would say, no, it means an end of an age. And to the Mayan, there had been hundreds of ages before, and there are going to be hundreds of ages after. It's not the end of the universe, the end of the world. It was just the end of an age, because like all calendars, eventually you run out of space. But sadly, all people remembered was it was going to be the end of the world. Their entire culture was reduced to that. Pause. So, eventually though, like all things, the Maya are going to end. They're going to decline. And so around the year 900 CE, the Mayan people in the south began to abandon their homes in the cities. And we're not 100% sure why this happens. We have some guesses, we have some ideas, but there's not a lot of evidence to explain why. Now, one of the big theories is that there was a lot of infighting going on, because you'll notice that I've been calling them Maya civilization and not the Maya empire, the Maya kingdom. The reason why I'm doing this is because they're not a unified people. They all speak the same language. They have all practice the same religion. They all have the same culture, but they, rather than being ruled by a single solitary king, each city would have a kind of its own king or ruler, and they would be the most powerful person. There was no one higher than them. And so they are very similar in this way to the Greek city-states. Think of Athens or Sparta, where, they were all Greeks. They spoke the same languages, they practiced the same religions, but the Spartans were not ruled over by the Athenians. And the Athenians were not ruled over by the Spartans. So you have, both groups consider themselves to be Greek, but they are independent of each other. And so this would often lead to conflict. We think the same thing is what was going on with the Mayan. We know that they were not unified, and so we think that one of the reasons perhaps that the people began to abandon their homes is because after constant fighting for hundreds of years, the people became weaker and weaker. They weren't able to defend themselves from outside threats, external threats. And so they were trying to get away from those potential threats. Other, civilizations that were getting more powerful. So this might be one reason why they were fleeing. Because constant warfare would have weakened them. And in fact, we do know that at the very least in the north, this is what will eventually lead to the collapse of the Mayans completely, as they will eventually be conquered by the Aztec and assimilated into the Aztec culture. But while that's a great theory, and that does explain what happens in the north, when we look at the south, it doesn't always line up. Another theory that we have is that climate change was going on, or over-farming was happening. So basically the people were causing huge impacts on the landscape and the environment that they were living in, and farming no longer became possible. And so they were having to move to find new places to farm, and this was perhaps sometimes outside of the Mayan civilization. So, but regardless, eventually the Mayan civilization is going to collapse, and that is going to lead us into our next civilization that we're going to talk about. Pause. So the next civilization that we're going to talk about are the Aztec. So around the year 1250 CE, a group of people settled in the valley of Mexico, calling themselves Mexica. Yes, you can laugh at my terrible pronunciations. It's not going to be the last time I mispronounce something in this slideshow. Now, they're known as the Mexica. They call themselves the Mexica, but to most people today, they're known as the Aztecs. And as I'm sure you're able to kind of already guess where they are going to, their empire will have been, it's in modern day Mexico. In fact, most Mexicans are descendants, meaning that their ancestors, if you could go back in time 500 years and meet, your great 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 grandfather, he would have been an Aztec if you're from Mexico. Now, legend has it that the Aztec people who were fleeing their enemies, and they had quite a lot of enemies, but as they were fleeing their enemies, looking for a place to shelter, a place to, defend themselves, they saw an eagle sitting on a cactus, eating a snake on this island in the middle of a lake. Now that also should sound familiar to you guys because, hey, that is actually the flag of the Mexican country. The country of Mexico, their flag is an eagle sitting atop a cactus eating a snake. And so the Aztec took this as a sign that they should build their city there. And so they built their city, Tenochtitlan, on this island in the middle of a lake. And it quickly became one of the greatest cities in the world. I really wish that we had time to talk about it. We sadly don't. Instead, you're going to read more about this city as kind of your extended learning activity that will be due at the end of this week. It's really, really cool, though. It's, in my opinion, one of the coolest cities that was ever built. One of the most impressive cities that was ever built. So I hope that you guys will enjoy it. Pause. So, who were the Aztec? Well, the Aztec were what we refer to, at least at the start, as a mercenary empire. What this means is that the Aztec would fight for whoever would pay them. This is known as being a mercenary. You don't fight for your king, rather you fight for whoever pays you. So you might be fighting for the King of England one day and then the King of Germany the next day. It's whoever hires you. Now the Aztec as a civilization were mercenaries. The Aztec ruler would loan his soldiers out to other empires or civilizations to serve as soldiers in their army. And everyone wanted the Aztec to fight for them because the Aztec were known as very fierce warriors. Sadly, modern movies make them seem to be these brutish thugs that like to sacrifice people. Was that part of the Aztec culture? Yes. Was that a big part of the Aztec culture? No, not really. but over exaggerations. I'll kind of talk more about that when we get into the Age of Exploration in a couple weeks, about how the Europeans kind of twisted everything. But for right now, all that you need to know is that the Aztecs were fierce soldiers. You didn't want to run into them. You know, think of like samurai or ninja or the Roman legions. The Aztec soldiers were ones that would strike fear into other people. But eventually, the Aztec grew tired of fighting for other civilizations. Specifically, one of the strongest civilizations out there, the Tepanecs, who the Aztec decided that they were tired of taking orders from them and decided to form an alliance with two other city-states. And then they overthrow, the three of them together, overthrow the Tepanecs. And when they realized how successful they were, they began to set out and conquer the surrounding land. And eventually, these two other city-states that were working with the Aztecs pledged their services, pledged their loyalty to the Aztec king or emperor, and we have the Aztec Empire form. Pause. Now, the last of the three civilizations we're going to be looking at are the Inca. At the height of their power, the Inca ruled over close to 10 million people along the Andes mountain range. So we started in Central America with the Maya, then we moved to Mexico with the Aztec, and now finally we're finishing off with the Inca in South America. And most of the land that they controlled is along the Andes mountain range, and they specifically controlled land that is now part of Peru, Chile, Bolivia, Argentina, and Ecuador. Now, the center of the Inca Empire, their capital city, was the city of Cuzco. Not Cuzcotopia. You know, I'm sure some of you guys have seen Emperor's New Groove. I personally love that movie. The emperor from Emperor's New Groove, Cuzco, is named after the city of Cuzco. It's kind of a reference. It's Disney's way of saying, hey, it's kind of a little inside reference. And so Cuzco was located high in the mountains of Peru. In fact, I believe it was the highest capital city in the world, in the ancient world. Now, by the year 1500, the Inca had reached the height of their power, and they had conquered nearly every nearby civilization. And this is quite impressive just because you consider that their territory mostly consisted of mountains. And we're going to talk more next week about some of the achievements that they made and what allowed them to control such a large amount of land. Pause. I just really like this picture. I'm going to talk more about this next week, but this is Machu Picchu, and this is one of the most impressive cities, in my opinion, that has ever been built. It's literally built on top of a mountain. Yeah, this isn't like, you know, built on top of a small hill. This is built like 10,000 feet up in the air. It's kind of incredible that they were able to build such a thing. Now, to manage such a large empire, the Inca had to build an extensive road system, very similar to how the Romans managed such a large empire. Now, different empires had different ways of dealing with this. The Chinese relied on scholar officials. The Romans relied on roads. The Inca are going to kind of take a page out of the Roman book and build this extensive road system. In fact, they're going to build 25,000 miles of road linked to all corners of the empire. And they also kind of took a page out of the Mongols' book when they built shelters every 15 to 30 miles for travelers to rest at. This makes not only the roads safer to travel on, but it has another really unique feature. See, the big problem with having such a large empire is obviously trying to get information from one side to the other. Because we don't have cell phones, we don't have planes, we don't have the internet, we don't even have cars or, I mean, we have boats, but you're up in the mountains, a boat ain't going to do you much good. So how do you get information from one point to another? Well, you have to physically carry it and walk and or run. But the problem is, the human body can only go so far. The fastest man in the world, Usain Bolt, I think he's been clocked at 25 miles an hour. But the problem is that's sprinting. The human body cannot maintain a 25 mile per hour speed. Marathon runners, I think the fastest marathon time in the was at about 2 hours and 30 minutes. That's roughly running on average at a speed of about 12 miles per hour. Now that's fast. You and I, we can't do that. We'd be lucky to average about maybe 5 miles an hour, you know, because we would get tired. Our bodies would get exhausted. We're not trained for that. But the Inca came up with a unique solution to this. Because if you can only carry a message, let's say 15 to 20 miles a day, and you need to get that message to someone that's, let's say, 150 miles away, it's going to take about 10 days to get there. And a lot can change in 10 days. And then it's going to take at least 10 days for the message for you to get a response back. So how did the Incas solve this problem? Well, they would give this letter to the messenger, and that messenger would run to one of these shelters, you know, and then they would pass that message off to another runner, and that runner would run to the next station, and so on and so forth. So each runner was only running perhaps 15 miles. But because of this, they were able to send that message up to 150 miles a day. That means now suddenly it goes from taking perhaps 10 days to get a message to someone that's 150 miles away to a single day. And so now you could get a response back in a total of 2 to 3 days after you sent your message. You know, going from, you know, 20 days to 2 to 3, that's incredible. And this is what allowed the Inca to control so much of their empire. The sad thing is, and we'll talk more about this when we get to the Age of Exploration, the Inca Empire is going to collapse very shortly after they reach the height of their power, mostly because the Spanish are going to arrive. And I'll talk more about how that leads to their destruction in a couple of weeks when we get to the Age of Exploration. Pause. Alright, so we have finished our notes for today. There are 3 review questions. You will find these questions in Google Classroom. This is due by Tuesday, tomorrow, at midnight. 3 short answer questions, but single sentences. Just restate the question and give me the answer. Which group of people influenced the Maya civilization? So the group of people that influenced the Mayan civilization were the blank. What was the name of that the Aztec had given themselves? And how many miles of roads did the Inca build? Please answer these in the assignment in Google Classroom. Very simple. Honestly, this should take you 5 minutes. These questions are more of just to make sure that you actually read the notes or listened to this video. Which, if you've made it this far, congratulations! Thank you to the 2 of you that probably actually made it to the end of the video. Additionally, just as a quick reminder, my office hours are every day from 9 to 11 a.m. You can always shoot me emails during that. You should be in your other classes, but if you have a 5-minute break or something, or get out early, you have a quick question, just shoot me an email. Also, my office hours are going to be from 1 to 3 every day as well. As a reminder, we do have class on Thursdays. Please check to see what time your class has its meeting with me. The meetings are going to be 15 minutes. Please do show up on time. I am going to start at exactly the beginning of each class, and I can't wait. We cannot wait for the late stragglers. If you show up late, you're just going to have to get caught up from whoever was in there. And that's it. Thank you guys. I hope that you enjoyed listening to this and watching it. As a reminder, let me know if you like the music or if you want me to get rid of it for the next time. Don't worry, you're not going to hurt my feelings if you don't like it. And yeah, other than that, if there are any suggestions, if I talked too fast during this video, if I wasn't loud enough, please let me know, because I'm figuring this out just like you guys are. This is not something I ever expected myself having to do, and I want to hear from you guys how I can make this better and easier for you. And no, the answer to make it easier is not to have you do nothing. Sorry guys, you do have to learn. Alright, thank you guys. I will see you all on Thursday, and have a wonderful week.